Welcome, everybody. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Banyen Books is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. My name is Jacob Steele, Events Coordinator for Banyen Books and Sound. Banyen is Canada's leading bookstore in spirituality and healing for 50 years. The store is open for in-person browsing, and we also have an easy-to-use web store where you can order online, and we'll ship books and products to you anywhere. And this, of course, includes today's featured book, The Artist's Journey. Just visit banyen.com. So welcome to tonight's event with Kent Nerburn on The Artist's Journey on making art and being an artist. If you have questions during the event, for Kent, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and there will be opportunities to have your questions discussed. Kent Nerburn is a sculptor and an award-winning author of 16 books, including the modern classic Neither Wolf Nor Dog. He's the founder and director of Project Preserve, working on the Red Lake Ojibwe Reservation, helping students collect memoirs of tribal elders. He holds a PhD in both theology and art, and he joins us today from Portland, Oregon. It's an honor to host you today. Welcome, Kent Nerburn.
Thank you, Jacob, and hello to everybody in my favorite country. In the struggle for the psychic ascendancy in North America, I hope you guys win. I wish we could get across the border, but it's not ours to do anymore. So anyway, I'm here to talk to you today about a book that I've written called The Artist's Journey. Now, some of you may know my work and some of you may not. I've mostly worked with Indigenous people, the Native Americans, as we call them here in America, in the United States. And I'm mostly known for a trilogy of 3 books that I did with them. Neither Wolf Nor Dog, The Wolf at Twilight, and The Girl Who Sang with the Buffalo. And I've spent 30 years working in the Native world, and that's sort of been where I've spent my physical and spiritual time. So in some ways, this book on the artist's journey would seem like a departure. Why would I write a book like this? Well, actually, it's not a departure. That the book came about as a result, not directly, but indirectly, of some time I spent in a sweat lodge. I think it was my 60th birthday, maybe my 65th birthday, where we were in this sweat lodge in Pine Ridge in South Dakota, and we had to pray. That's, what you do in a sweat lodge. And one of the things I asked was, I prayed to know how to be an elder, not just an old person or a senior citizen. How would I fulfill my appropriate role at this point in my journey in life? And I don't claim to be Native. In fact, it's unseemly for non-Native people to do so. They have most everything appropriated by our dominant culture, and I was not about to try to do that. But I do think I've learned a great deal from them and have tried to take in their learning and teaching as a way to understand the world. And one of the things that they say, and that is core to all the Native peoples, is to not think of life as a straight line between birth and death. That's the sort of the way that we develop ourselves as Westerners, is there is this time of becoming and this time of productivity, and then the time of sort of retreat and disappearance. And it's a very linear experience, but for the Native people, it's all in a circle. There are seasons of life. There's it's like the 4 seasons. There's the childhood, there's the sort of the becoming age, there's the adulthood, and then there's the winter season, the end season. And they say that when you get to the 4th season of life, that's the time you have to give back, because you're only in the 4th season of life have you seen the other 3 seasons? And can you speak with any authority about the passage that everyone goes through and what you discover in the course of your journey? So I saw that as my obligation. What is my obligation to give back? What can I give back? What do I know? What have I done that allows me to speak with some sort of moral and spiritual authority and authenticity in the course of my life? Well, I did one book that was called Voices in the Stones, where I talked about what I learned from being with the Native people. But that really isn't the core of what I've learned. What I've learned in the course of 30, in the course of 70 some years now, is something about the arts. I've been a sculptor. I was a sculptor for 20 years, had work in the work in the Peace Museum in Hiroshima, have work in various places around the US. Um, I've been a writer for 30 years. I have been friends with people in the arts, with actors, with musicians, painters, photographers. If you happen to see The Artist's Journey, which he recommended, Margaret Atwood wrote about it. Rick Rubin, the producer, became a friend of mine, and I traveled down to visit with him in Malibu. Darren Aronofsky wrote an endorsement for it. And Neither Wolf Nor Dog, my friend Robert Plant wrote an introduction to it. These are the people I know. And because I know them, I know the artistic world. And so I said, that's what I can do. I can give back to the world when I speak about the arts. So how to do that? What was the impetus? The impetus really comes from the letters I get from people. And one day I got a letter from a young woman named Jennifer. And she was, I don't know, she was in her teens, somewhere maybe late teens. And it was a very heartfelt letter. She had wanted to know how it is that she could live a life in the arts. She says, do I dare live in the life in the arts? Does it work? Can a person actually have a viable and meaningful life? I'm afraid. What should I do? And I listened to that. And when I read that letter, I recognized something. I recognized something in my own experience. Because when I was in graduate school at Stanford in a program in religious studies and humanities, in a very high-powered and abstract program, I was absolutely miserable. I was looking to deal with belief as a lived experience by people, and we were studying the concept of belief. Everything felt distant. And so I said, I've got to get out of this. And I wrote to Norman Mailer, the writer, and said, Norman, can I come and work with you and study with you? And I'm not exactly sure what it was that Norman Mailer had that so fascinated me. I think what it was is that he had a muscularity in his prose, and he knew how he was intelligent without being intellectual. And he'd never given up the life of the streets, which is what I knew and what I understood and what I valued. So I wrote this letter to him, a very heartfelt letter, just like Jennifer wrote to me. And he wrote back to me. And, Norman Mailer was always considered to be a very gruff human being. But here's what he wrote back. And this was, March 1970. Dear Kent Nerburn, your letter is fine, but I'm not going to respond to it. I work alone, and I think very little can be learned about writing being in the neighborhood of another writer, unless one uses a scribe, and that hardly seems a role for you. The heart of becoming a writer is to come into focus on oneself, to know, and it's usually not best not to know until after you've done it, what has finally become important to write about, and what you can say that no one else particularly can. And that can take years in all sorts of occupations. But there's no quick road to a focus like working. It's part of the hurdle. In fact, it keeps most talented people from becoming real writers. Anyway, you wrote your letter so long ago that you're doubtless in a different mood. Hope this finds you well. If you're in doubt, work. Write more than you have been writing. Sincerely, Norman Mailer. There's Norman's letter. And, it was a small letter, but to a man who felt he was drowning in the world. It was a lifeline. It was something to hold on to. And that was a gift, the likes of which no one else had ever given me, that I needed at that point. So when I got this letter from Jennifer, I said, I owe her, just like I owe everyone who's written to me from the time I started writing. I owe them to pay back Norman Mailer for what he did. He gave me a gift, and I believe it's important to pass the gifts on that we get. So I thought, well, I could write Jennifer a letter, or maybe what I should do is write a letter not only to Jennifer, but to all the Jennifers, and to the Jennifer inside of all of us. A letter to all the writers, all the authors, all the poets, the sculptors, the artists who want to know something about what the life of the artist is. And whether they can make it, whether it works. So I decided to write a book about the life of the artist, and not about me particularly. This is in no way a biography, but it's a look into the heart of the creative process, and with all its hidden joys and all its unseen challenges, and how it affects your life if you choose to live a life in the arts. And so what I would do is I would choose to speak from the voice of the artistic elder, and thus fulfill my obligation to give back. So the book I wrote, and I mentioned it as a book because as a writer, writing is my spiritual exercise. I don't write a book to express a different spirituality, spiritual experience, or to explicate it. Writing and the arts have been my spiritual journey. And I write, so what is in the book is really what I want said. So when I talk about the book, really what I'm looking at is something that I hope is transparent to meaning, to heart, and not merely words on a page. So it isn't a book, a how-to book. If you want a how-to book or a book of inspiration, I'd say go to The Artist's Way. That's a much better choice. It's not a book of instruction. It's not even a book of inspiration or consolation, although it is a book of all of those. It's a kitchen table conversation to tell you what it means to be an artist and to tell you that you're not alone. Let me start with a quote from Rumi. He says, "Inside you, there's an artist you don't know about." And that brings up a fundamental artistic divide that every person has to deal with. It's the divide and the fundamental distinction between artistry and art. And let me read a little bit from the book here. So I'll probably read more from the book than you're accustomed to hearing from people speaking to you, but this is the best way to do it. There is art and there is artistry, and they are not the same. Artistry is raising an act to a level of proficiency and clarity that allows it to shine with a brilliance that others performing the same act seldom achieve. It is seeing through to the heart of an activity and performing it with mindfulness and excellence. The artistry of the surgeon, the artistry of the homemaker, the artistry of the mechanic and the machinist are all expressions of this urge toward excellence. Art is something different. It is creating something unique, never before seen or heard. A child, freshly born, adding a new voice to the chorus of creation. It is fragile and moves on unsteady legs, uncertain of its place, or even if it has a place at all. It differs from artistry in that artistry is an elevation, a consecration of the ordinary. And just a bit more on that. That artistry, that the issue of artistry is that, let's see where, let me find this on 63 and 64. I'll find it for you. Hold on, my apologies for not having that properly placed here. Yes, we do not confer the mantle of artist on the counselor or the surgeon or the homemaker or the carpenter because we do not see what they do as fitting into our definition of art. We grant them competence, and excellence. Worthy attributions to be sure, but we do not accord their accomplishments the same status we give to a novelist or a dancer or a musician. But the teacher who knows the exact moment to challenge or praise a child, the mother who knows when to support and when to discipline, the father who knows when to let go and let a child fly free, are making choices every bit as artistic as the painter choosing a palette or the actor choosing a gesture. See, the one group meets the moment. The people dealing with artistry meet the moment. The artist, the creator, creates the moment. And we need them both if we're ever to be a culture that is going to be fully human and fully whole. What I'd like to do in the rest of this talk tonight is to focus on art as the creation of something new, not simply as artistry. And in the book, I broke it down into the hard places, the hidden secrets, and the unseen joys. And I'm going to start by talking about there are some absolutes in the world of the arts, and I'll mention but two of them. One is the balance of craft and inspiration. Here's a quote from Émile Zola. There are two men inside the artist, the poet and the craftsman. One is born a poet, one becomes a craftsman. And here's a quote from Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Be a good craftsman, it won't stop you from being a genius. If someone tells you but there is but one way to create or one way to find your artistic voice, be wary. They may have a technique or method that works for them, and you should always listen to what they have to say. After all, the essence of being an artist is to be open to the full richness of the world around us. But if they say this is the way it must be done, listen with caution. Take their words as a reflection of their confidence in their own method of creation, but don't allow them to distort your own vision or control your own search for the wellspring of your art. This is not to say that you should ignore the techniques and methods of others. Much good can be gained by putting yourself in the hands of a teacher who has a definite and specific way of creating. After all, any teacher who has lived a long life in the arts has hard-won knowledge, and the lessons he or she has to teach will imprint your work for better, even if you choose to take different direction in your own artistic journey. As young artists, we are too quick to want to run to the well of pure creative expression. We do not want to subject ourselves to training that seems to run contrary to the creative fire that burns inside us. The training we are getting, though, when we follow a certain course of study, is playing a crucial role in helping us to develop our own artistic voice. It is giving us a foundation on which to build and helping us develop as artists by making us realize who we are not. I often think of when I trained as a sculptor. I went to work for a Greek wood carver. He made iconostases, like 40-foot Greek altar screens, these iconostases, and they were incredibly formal. You could not vary anything from the traditional leaf structure, the way they were made, and he was absolutely an impeccable craftsman. He would cut a perfect line in the middle of a leaf, and you could measure it from side to side, and and you would find that the line was exactly down the middle of this leaf. And he was such a stickler, he would stand over me with a 2x4 sometimes and behind me and say, he would say, I hit you, I cannot take you missing the cut like that. And it scared the heck out of me. I could hardly stand to work with the man. I couldn't wait to get out of there. But when it came time to do my own sculpture, and I started trying to put a feeling in an eye, where the turn of the eye made just a millimeter of difference to turn it from sadness to reflectiveness, I could do it because that man's training had given me the capacity to create excellently. Because the craftsmanship allowed the artist in me to come out. So really, this is the point where you have to try to find the perfect balance between mastery and discovery, because that's the place, the true place where the vibrant artistic creation lies. Another issue that everyone in all art forms has to create or has to address is the challenge of accident. I like to think there are two types of creators. There's what I call the architects and the gardeners. The architects set themselves a form and they fill it out. They try to do it as perfectly as possible. In writers, they outline things. In painters, they may draw the underpainting. They may know exactly what to do, what they're going to do, and then they just realize it once they get the initial form defined. And then there are the gardeners, those of us who work like walking into a garden and discovering. And things happen in the course of that. I had a friend who went to work, he went to Hollywood, was a young Indian man, and he went to Hollywood and he got a role in The Magnificent Seven playing along with Morgan Freeman. And Morgan Freeman got on him one day and said, "You can't plan for magic. Let it happen. Let the accidents happen." And so he did. And he said that was the best lesson he got from this. And I've seen this in my own work. I saw it when I was working in bronze. I would try to create a figure, and the figure, I remember one figure I made that it was an extension like this of a human form, and it was almost perfect. And the wax fell over and broke. And in the breaking, what was left was an attenuated figure that was broken and amputated. But what had happened is it had broken, those were natural breaks. It was a natural form that had been achieved. And the casting I did from that particular piece had much more life than the full form because accident had played its role in this. I've been writing books and writing pieces. I've had characters get away from me. Any author knows this. You set a character into a book. I'm working on one right now, and it did not go anywhere that I thought it was going to go. I didn't know who this character, I thought I knew this character. Setting the character loose in the book became an adventure in chasing and discovering who this character was. It was absolutely wandering into the garden and finding a different truth, finding something that I had never expected to find. And you have to be open to this possibility of accident. Every artist knows it, an accident and discovery. You don't know what it is that makes you decide to develop a character in a certain way. You don't know what it is that makes you decide to use a certain gesture, to make a certain cut, to put a certain stroke onto the canvas. It's a rare and magical thing, and you have to trust this magic of accident. Like Morgan Freeman said, you can't plan for accident. So those are two simple things: finding the balance between craft and inspiration, and the challenge of accident, and knowing where in the world between the architect and the gardener is where you're going to find your artistic power. I'd like to talk a little bit about the power of music. I think that one of the things that's absolutely most crucial for anyone in any art form is to study other art forms. When you study your own art form, and you look at the great artists in your own art form, you're measuring yourself against them in some way. Yes, they're models. Yes, they're mentors. But what you're seeing is the idealized version of what you would like to be. That there's something in looking at their work that shapes your work as well as it shapes your understanding. But if you listen to other art forms and find an art form other than your own that teaches you, it's a rare and joyful experience. Music to me it's my chosen other art form. And I truly think that music is, it has supernatural power. It's the mother art form. Because, we all know this. If you're listening to a piece of music, you hear two notes of a piece of music, and you know that piece of music. If I show you 1 centimeter of painting, likely you're not going to know what it is. If I read you 2 words or 3 words of particular novel that you read in the past. You may not recognize it, you won't understand it, but we can hear when we were 9 years old. If you hear a piece of music that you heard when you were 9 years old, you know it, you find it. It takes root in you in a different way. And music has an evanescence. The great thing about music, the magical thing about music is consider before we could capture music through mechanical forms, it never existed except in the moment it was played. I mean, it's truly an ethereal and evanescent art form. Like I said, I tend to I call it the mother art. And music contains everything you need to know about aesthetic creation. Whatever the art form is, it's got rhythm, it's got tempo, it's got line, it's got shape, it's got mass, coloration, texture, shading, emotional, intellect, everything. Everything is in music. And the music you love, the music that resonates with you, should tell you a great deal about the art that lives inside of you. I mean, I tend to, I listen to blues and classical music. Those are two things I love very much. And if I want, I have to be careful in the course of a day. If I'm going to write and I put on a piece of music, it can overtake me and shape the rhythms of what I'm doing. And at the same time, if I choose well, it can ennoble me. It can extend me. If I listen to, this may mean nothing to you, but the last, the last movement of Mahler's Second Symphony, it strains at the bonds of belief and yearning in a way that challenges me. Can I strain at that bonds of belief and yearning in my writing in the same way? It sort of tells you where the limits are. Or if you listen to interpretations, I like Bach's cello suites, for example. And if you listen to Yo-Yo Ma play them versus Pablo Casals playing them, you hear two different people, two different geniuses listening, reflecting on a third genius. And that, it buoys you up. If you're having a low day, if you're not able to create, those are the things that say someone else could create. Not, oh yes, someone else was if you're a writer saying, well, someone else did good writing, but someone else was alive artistically in this day. And that brings you alive. And it doesn't matter what the music is, if it has an authenticity, if it's made from the heart, it can teach you. So you need to stretch yourself musically and learn its lessons. I like to think if I could write a sentence that the way Miles Davis plays a line of music, I could die happy. And then just go a little bit more into the idea of music. Music undergirds writing. I'll use writing as because that's what I'm doing. I used it in sculpture too, because it gave a lyricism and a rhythm to my work, both the physical act of carving and sculpting and the shape and line that I used. But in writing, it's if you pay attention to it, inside of all writing, there is music. It just is. It's not immediately apparent. Different artists have different rhythms, but you can find the rhythm in their reading, in their writing, if you read it carefully. And here's a simple example that I sometimes talk to people about, and that is hickory dickory dock. The mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck one. The mouse ran down. Hickory dickory dock. Nursery rhyme we all know. Now, consider this. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Hickory dickory dock. The mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck one. The mouse ran down. Hickory dickory dock. You could not have two things further apart than that nursery rhyme and that version of the Our Father. And yet the rhythm and the music inside of each of them is absolutely the same. This is there in almost all writing. It may not be that obvious. It may be more staccato. It may push more. It may strain more. But a good writer always puts music inside their work. And the same can be said for any other art form. But because writing is what I'm doing these days, that's where I pay the most attention. Well, what I'd like to do then is talk to you about two dark realities in the creative experience: rejection and money. Now, these are things we all know about, and they're not deep issues, but they're loud issues. And I'm going to read you the piece on rejection here because I think it's pretty good, and I think it's worth your time and worth hearing because all of us know this experience of rejection. Let's see. That is all right. Here we go. You will not have to journey far along the path of the artistic life before you receive a note or a phone call about a manuscript you submitted, an audition you made, or a competition you entered. It will begin something like this: "Thank you for sharing your work with us. Unfortunately," the rejection will hit you like a blow because your expectation was filled with hope, and hope is life. All the emotions of grief will well up in you: anger, disbelief, and a lonely, private sadness. Perhaps you'll be resilient and take the blow with grace. Perhaps you will be fragile and unsure and will find in the rejection a confirmation of your greatest fears, that you're mediocre and without talent. Perhaps you'll believe, if only for a moment, that the struggle is not worth pursuing and you will want to quit. Do not feel alone. All of us have been there. One of the hard truths in a life in the arts is that each of us, in some secret corner of our heart, harbors the silent belief that we contain greatness within us. At the same time, we live with the private fear that when all is stripped away, we are mediocrities with little to say and no ability to say it. When we experience rejection, our fears of mediocrity and charlatanism come rushing to the fore, leaving us ashamed and humiliated. We are overwhelmed with the self-doubt that has been lurking around the corners of our creative efforts, and we feel naked, unworthy, and unmasked. Though these feelings lessen with age and experience, they never go away completely. But if we take a step back and allow the rejection to forge and temper us rather than destroy us, it can be a learning experience. Remember that any creative act involves great emotional risk. As an artist, you have taken something from deep within yourself and placed it out for the world to see. You have exercised an act of courage, putting forth a part of your heart, something invested with your fondest hopes, and given it the best of which you are capable. You have laid it out, innocent and vulnerable, hoping that it will be loved in the same measure as the love with which it was created. It is new, fresh, and filled with bright hope, unprepared for the bright sunlight of harsh scrutiny. When it is rejected, and this rejection can come as a rebuke by someone of professional significance, or the merest glance or lack of enthusiasm by someone you love and trust, there is a feeling of desolation that can cut to the very core of your being. How deep it runs and how fully it overwhelms you depends on your own emotional makeup and confidence in the strength of your own vision. I cannot tell you how to respond to rejection. I can only tell you that it will come and that you must be prepared to deal with it and that you must not let it defeat you. What you must do is find a way to allow yourself to grieve appropriately and in sufficient measure to be able to move forward without carrying unhealed wounds that skew your vision and cloud your judgment. Make no mistake, rejection is a wound, and a wound unhealed, like an anger unresolved, festers below the surface, causing us to lose the emotional balance necessary to move forward with grace and confidence. We begin to harbor grudges, to see conspiracies against us, to feel persecuted and misunderstood. We turn against the very world that our creative spirit asks us to embrace. Such attitudes are poison to our art. How can we feel the freedom to create if we fear the judgment of those around us? How can we keep ourselves open to the richness of human experience if we harbor a grudge against any who might choose to reject us? Remember, your feeling of rejection is greater than the investment of those who have rejected you. Allowing their rejection to claim you gives them and their point of view power over you, and you should never give anyone power over your creative vision. You cannot know what their rejection is because you cannot know whether their rejection is because they understand your work better than you do or because they don't understand it at all. The world is full of people who want to see others fail, people who are blind to their own motives and who act from petty jealousy or unexamined insecurity. The opinions of these people matter, as the opinions of all people matter, because they are the responses of people you are hoping to reach with your work. But they are not necessarily the sharp edge of truth, and you must not take them as truth, any more than you should take the words of those who praise you as truth. Let the praise of others buoy you, but not let the attacks of others destroy you. Most of all, seek the voices of those who can teach you. Their words will shine light into your heart and move your creative vision forward. Keep in mind that rejection is not the same as failure. Rejection merely means that someone, rightly or wrongly, did not find value in your work. It could happen because you did not meet their emotional or intellectual needs. It could come because they did not see clearly what you were attempting. It could come because they were having a bad day and you were not emotionally present to your work. It can have any of 100 sources. Failure only comes when you allow rejection to defeat you, and this is something you should never allow to happen. Remember that in choosing to create, you have acted with a rare courage. You have let down the mask. You have called forth your best self. You have taken a chance and revealed your heart to the world. This, no matter how strongly and unformed the creation it brings forth, is a praiseworthy act. For all creation is an act of love, and in the merest making of your art, you have, in your own small way, made the world a little richer, a little warmer, and a little more filled with love. And for that, you need feel no shame and make no apology, no matter what others might say about your work. And all of us experience that rejection, and it never stops hurting. It hurts less when you experience more accomplishment, but it never stops hurting because you're giving something of yourself out there, and you've laid yourself out with a vulnerability that people who don't create never really understand. So accept it, know it, take it for what it is, grieve it, but do not let it shape you. Use it to move forward. Use it to make yourself stronger. The second issue that everyone in the arts has to deal with is money. And here's the simple truth. Bills are consistent, income is not. If you're working in the arts, you're living in a project-based world. You go from job to job. Essentially, you're fired after every job. If you're lucky, you get rehired for another one right away. But in fact, you're going from project to project, and your bills are rolling in with a consistency like waves on the shore. How do you deal with this? There are two choices that people make. One is to say, I'm going to do something closely related to my art, and therefore I'm going to stay present to it and near to the art form that I love dearly. But when you do that, you run the risk of dissipating your art into relatively insignificant creations. When I wanted to be, for a while, I was studying when I was trying to make life-size sculptures. I ended up having to make a living. I wanted to stay close to sculpting. So I ended up making a living by carving barrel heads, happy monks on barrel heads. And I could do them quickly, and they paid the bills. But what that was doing was taking away my creative energy from the sculpture that I wanted to do. So I needed to get away from working closely allied to my art. In order to save my energy for the art, I said I will make my living elsewhere, and then I will save the creative energy for the arts. So I went and took a job driving a cab, and so I drove a cab for several years. And in driving a cab, the immediacy of the experience took me over so much that pretty soon I had the rhythms of the street in me, the people that I had, the memories of the people I dealt with in me. I had the conversational patterns of a cab driver in me. It was overwhelming and intoxicating and debilitating. And what I did is I lost the artist in me. Because I had no energy to go back to the sculpture when the time came. Instead, I was a cab driver. I was not a sculptor. Now, you don't have a choice. There are people who manage to balance these two elements. I mean, William Carlos Williams was a doctor. I think um, any number of artists have managed to live on the outside of their arts and stay inside. Kurt Vonnegut, I think, was a car dealer. Uh, so you can do it, but you're going to have to make that choice somewhere along the way of whether you stay close to your art in order to keep it alive in your hands, in your heart, in your spirit, in your mind, or whether you want to go far away from it and make your money elsewhere. Because the fact is that bills are consistent, income isn't. So all of us have to deal with this, and you will your whole life. So be prepared for that. Let me go to one deeper, less understood issue that all artists have to confront. And it's really a very fascinating one. It's the issue of time. Time is a variable in the art world, very much unlike, it's not clock time, it's something else again. Again, let me read something about time here. I wrote a little bit about time, and I found it terribly significant. I find time terribly significant. And the two quotes that I used to start the chapter are, "Art is never finished, but only abandoned." That's Leonardo da Vinci. And patience is also a form of action. That's Auguste Rodin. Knowing when to stop, when to continue, how to bring your work to completion without losing your creative energy. These are challenges all artists face, and how you deal with them will determine much about the quality of your work and the way you feel about what you have accomplished. We have all heard the famous canard spoken by Leonardo da Vinci and echoed by so many others, that a work of art is never finished, but only abandoned. In our minds, we know this is true, but is hard to accept in our hearts. When we have labored long on a project and have watched it move ever closer to what we want to be, we don't want to give up on it until we craft it to perfection. Just a little more, we say, just a little adjustment, and I'll have it. Soon enough, it overtakes us. We go from joyful preoccupation to creative obsession. We can't sleep, we can't get away from it in our mind. The world has fallen away and nothing else matters. Our artistic child is crying out to be born. Every artist knows this feeling, whether it's the actor trying to shape a character, the composer trying to get the orchestration just right, the writer trying to expand a description, or the painter trying to decide whether to add another color to the canvas. We're seeking that moment when our work turns toward us and says, "I am complete, I am done, I am all I ever can be." In truth, this seldom happens. More often, we reach a point where we become blind to our work. We find ourselves analyzing rather than creating, hoping that by parsing our decisions one more time or a little more closely, we will come to some certainty and clarity, when in fact, with each parsing, we're becoming less clear and less certain. We know too much and trust too little. Eventually, we reach a point where we simply have to say, "Enough, I choose to let go." This is a difficult moment because letting go is an act of faith, not an act of knowledge. It is a moment when courage meets instinct and we have to choose against what feels like our better judgment to step back and set the work free. Knowing how to choose this moment is an art in itself, because no matter how good we get technically or how confident we become in our creative process, indecision is always present. You will never know if your work is less than it could have been if you would quit a day sooner or gone on a day longer. And there's another side to this, so the absolute opposite side. That's the challenge of when the work is finished and you're not. And that is what we're talking about in the piece I just read. You can't quit. You don't know when you're done. You can overwork it, you can kill it, or maybe you should go a little bit further. The piece may be done, but you're not finished. But then there's the other side, when you're finished, but the work is not. You know this, and I'm facing this right now in this piece, this book that I'm writing. And you can tell when this moment comes because you start thinking about the next project, or you find yourself not being present, that you have to fight to get to that moment of passionate involvement. And what's happened is you have come to the end of your creative energies for that particular project, but the project hasn't reached its completion. And you have to find a way to make this work, because a work of art has a gestation period. And that gestation period is a natural rhythm, and it will come to its conclusion when it is done. If you get done emotionally before that work is done, what do? Well, usually the best thing you can do is leave it alone, because it will find its form eventually, and you'll come back to it. It's very hard to leave a work alone for a week, a month, a year. But sometimes you have to leave a work alone so you can re-energize in relation to it. But you have to get to that point where you are alive to the work and bringing it to its logical conclusion. And these are just a few of the things that you go through in your life as an artist. I try to cover a lot of them in the book. I'll just mention a few because I think they're worthy of drawing attention to what actually I think is important here. The peril of easy blessing, the need for long patience, and the pitfalls of early success. The harsh reality of critics and criticism. The tyranny of success and recognition. Like I said, Robert Plant's a friend of mine. And I remember talking to Robert about that. We were out on the streets, and he can't even go out on the street. Those of you who don't know him, he was the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, and now he's a man my age. But he says, you can't imagine what it's like to have had your identity frozen at the age of 24. And think of that. In between 18 and 24, that's who he is in everyone's mind. And he's almost 70. He may be 70 now. And that he had the golden handcuffs of early success. And everyone said, keep doing what you do. And they get on stage. I don't care even if he goes on stage now, and I've seen him on stage, and they break into giant applause when they do Stairway to Heaven, because that's who they think he is. And this issue of the golden handcuffs is as real as the issue of having no success whatsoever. I talk about the divine thread, the psychic connection between the artist and the audience, which is an amazing experience. You can tell when you're connected and when you're not connected. And when you're not, very often, the problem is not the audience. The problem is you. And knowing how to make that connection, knowing how to respect that connection is a very important part of the artistic experience. The right stroke, knowing how to make the right stroke at the right moment. There's a story about Leonardo working on The Last Supper, and some man came to watch him work, and he watched him all day. And Leonardo came down, and the man said, well, oh, geez, I watched you. I was here to watch you paint. You only made one stroke. And Leonardo said, yes, but it was the right one. And so you have to learn how to make the right stroke, what the right stroke is in relation to a work of art. Well, I could go through all of these, but I think what I should do is end by just reading something that I think kind of speaks to the artistic challenge in life, what I wanted to write to Jennifer at the end. I've spoken of the joys and magic of this life, and have given you a vision of the world that awaits you when you give yourself to it. It is a life unlike any other, and those of you who choose it are privileged to live inside this rare and magical realm. Still, the life of the artist is not easy. The world will not understand you. It will praise you too much and respect you too little. It will see the grace that you have struggled so hard to achieve in your work and assume that it came easily or as the result of God-given talent. It will assume that you are indifferent to the worldly concerns of finances and economic survival, and think that the satisfaction of living a creative life is compensation enough. It will look upon you with envy because you get to live the life of the Creator, and regard you with jealousy because you appear to avoid the dross of an ordinary life. It will distort you in ways you cannot imagine. Though these difficulties will weigh on you, they are a small price to pay for the gifts you've been given. You've learned to see the world with mindfulness because in the life of an artist, no moment is insignificant. You've been kept from cynicism because you know that work based on cynicism is heartless and callow. You've known the gift of conversing with people from different times and different lands because art is a language of the heart, and the heart is universal. Most of all, you've been given the gift of endless youth because your life is based on curiosity, and the curious never get old. These are no small gifts, and you should embrace them with pride. For even if your work seems small and your accomplishments insignificant, you are part of the tribe of endless dreamers, the bearers of the cultural imagination, the shapers of the vision of what life could be. Who else can go to the furthest reaches of the imagination and bring back new meaning and put it into physical form? Who else can bring a mindfulness to life that is celebratory and not cynical? Who else can show us that nothing is insignificant, no one is without a story, and can call us to look at the everyday with a compassionate heart? Who else can make us pause in our headlong rush through time to look closely at a moment, hallowing it with our attention? Who else can re-envision the ordinary? We artists are among the few who can bring these gifts, and we all own this legacy, no matter how great or small the works that come from our hand. Embrace this role. You have trained your eye to see beauty, your ear to hear music. You have learned to shape meaning from chaos, to see pattern and order where others see nothing. You spin gold from straw and create life where none existed before. I often think of the words of Martha Graham, the American dancer and choreographer. There is only one of you in all time, she said, and there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. If you block it, the world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. You do not even have to believe in yourself or your work. You have to keep yourself open and aware to the urges that motivate you. No artist is pleased. There is only a queer divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others. You need to trust that blessed unrest. Keep yourself marching. Keep that force alive in you and continue to remind us by your work of life's creative mystery and the richness of human possibility. This is a joyful burden, the important burden, far beyond the small difficulties and challenges that weigh on our days. You are an artist, and it is a way of the heart. So with that, I'll stop, and we've got just a few minutes for questions, but any comments? I'm happy to hear them, happy to take them.
We have a question from Linda. Do you have a schedule for writing as you would for any other work? In other words, do you write regularly every day, and is it usually productive?
No, I used to write early in the morning, but of late I allow myself to write. I sort of dip in and out. It's better. The more reasonable thing to say is once a work catches fire, then I can't be stopped from it. Then I find myself working late at night. But usually it used to be when I kept to a rigid schedule, it was always early in the morning because I didn't want the intrusion of thoughts. I didn't, you know, there is truth in that fact that you can put an idea to bed with you at night, wake up and have some resolution in the morning. But better than that, you wake up to silence. You don't wake up to the mind is a fearsome place, and it's constantly full of conversation. And once we start conversations with each other, once we start reading newspapers, looking at the internet, looking at our phone, listening to that, we come down to a level that does not allow us to open ourselves so fully to the imagination. So times of silence are the ones that work best for me. And now they seem to be more late at night than they are in the morning.
There's a question from Stephen. What words could you please share about procrastination and avoidance when it comes to sitting down and being creative?
Well, I'll use William Faulkner's. He said that the toughest thing about being a writer is keeping your ass in the chair. And you know, he's a Nobel laureate. I can't do much better than that. But I think that I know there's a lot of techniques. I know that in The Artist's Way, she speaks of some various techniques. But I think that one thing is you need to start with whatever it is you can write and at any given time. Writing is you know, it's kind of like riding a bike. In the your balance is a little bad at first. If you start by writing an email, if you start by writing a letter, anything that allows you to start chasing something when you're writing, rather than when you're creating, rather than criticizing or pulling a stone up the hill behind you. So I would say you just need to sit down and start writing. And you can't beat yourself up for the physical act of not writing. A lot of writing takes place before you actually sit down at the keyboard or at the desk. Uh, it's processing and taking little notes, taking little snippets, anything that lets it come out and gives it any sort of coalesced form is what you need to do. Um, I'm not a believer that the desk is where all the great writing takes place. And I mean all the great writing for an individual. A lot of times it's while walking. Um, for me, it's riding a bike. I have a bike riding and it drives me crazy. I have an idea and I have to stop and scribble it down, stick it in my pocket on a napkin, and then I get back and I can start putting that down. And it also depends on if you're a tablet writer or a computer writer. Uh, those make a big difference if you're someone that sits and works with a pencil. And your thought process is slower and different than if you're at a computer or a keyboard. And you have to just find what works for you, and then you have to be willing to. I think you have to be gentle with yourself, uh, knowing that you're going to get something out if you keep leaning towards the light. Something will come out.
Do you have insights for finding one's authentic voice? And a twin question connected with this: um, what do you see as the value or problematic aspect of imitation?
Imitation. I think imitation is a valuable learning tool. If you try to write like somebody else, I hear people say, "Oh, don't try to be the next Hemingway. Don't try to be the next Louise, or don't try to be the next Margaret Atwood." But when you try to, if you read a person, I mean, at least maybe this is just for me, but I know when I read somebody, what I pick up are their rhythms, their paces, the the degree of description, the quality of their thought, the degree of interiority, how much they tend to reveal about the inside of the mind and the point of view. And so when I sit and write, very often I'll take on some of these characteristics, and they become mentors. Uh, I really think that we need to look upon other creators as helpmates and mentors, not as people that are going to harm our creativity. And like you say, it really ties into the issue of voice. And voice is a funny thing. Uh, it's always been a challenge for me because I've got any number of different writers' voices. Uh, there are people who naturally sit down and have one voice. I know any of the number of them. They never have to figure out how they're going to write because they write the same way all the time. If you read 3 or 4 of my books, you would find a very different person in each of them. Um, and for me, finding a voice is really a matter of coming out of a quiet space. It's a matter of, you know, I mean, conversational. What you're doing is you're raising your conversational self to a much higher level. Uh, I think that's when you sound like you're natural. If you're writing I tell this to young people. If you're talking to your mom about something you did, you're going to use a very different voice than you do when you're talking to your friends, or if you got arrested and you're talking to the cop. Uh, there, you have a different voice every time, and I think the voice that you want to use is the one that you're most the best friend you have out there. I don't care whether it's your dog or God or your girlfriend or whatever. That's a natural voice. Find that and follow that voice because you're not thinking about it. You're simply using it.
Time for just one more question. This is about confidence and where, or do you have advice for how you find confidence in your own vision?
Confidence in your own vision. You have to accept the fact that I think the people who are most confident are very often the worst artists. That's a terrible thing to say. Uh, and I had this talk with Robert Plant actually at one time because well, I mean, he's totally confident in who he is, although he's not confident in what he's accomplishing at this point in his life. Uh, but you, I think all, like I said in that one piece, we all live with the fear of being a charlatan and a dream of greatness, and those live inside of both of us. Um, it's very hard not to feel that you have, excuse me, that you have nothing to offer, and that when you say it, you're not saying it well. And I mean that in every single art form. Um, it's confidence is a spiritual value. It's a belief, not necessarily that what you're doing is good, but that what you're doing is the best you can do. Um, I, one of the things I point out in there is that when you work in an art form, one of the fascinating things about art forms is uh, you create a body of work in the course of your life. I call them like strings of pearls, pearls on a string, a necklace. And at a certain point, you've created all of these pieces in your life. And what do you have? How can you trust them? How can you trust that they're part of the same person and the same vision? If you start from, if you're always looking, if you look back at the work you did before, you can always think you could do it better or do it differently, or that you can only do it at that particular time. The one absolute is excellence. If no matter who you are at any given time, you do it the best you can possibly do it, that you can have peace. You may not have confidence, but you can have peace. And I mean, I had a friend, luckily he wasn't in the arts, who said, I always try to do just enough not to embarrass myself. That person should never get near the arts. They shouldn't be allowed to even touch it. You just have to believe in trying to be excellent and knowing that you're going to live to create again. You are not your creation. Once you put your creation out there, it's a child, and you will have another child. And that's really, I think, where confidence comes from, is just knowing that you get another chance. You always get another chance. And if you try to be excellent as a value of humility and spirituality, in the long run, you can start to trust that the things you do will get better and better and better.
Well, there's been so many comments of gratitude and thanks, and I want to echo that as well on behalf of Banyen Books for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us.
Mhm. And I would truly say this, this book is really not, it's only a way of holding thoughts that I think are valuable to pass on. And so I would ask people to look at it. If they hear anything, if they're struggling in any way, or they want anything to help coalesce their understanding of the experience of an artist, take a look at what's in there, because I really think I laid it out well, and it reflects 70 some years of learning and a lot of body blows and a lot of dreams. And if you're experiencing both the body blows and the dreams, you might find something of value in there. And I thank you all for letting me come into your Zoom rooms tonight.
Thank you to all, and thank you, Kent, on behalf of Banyan Books.